Have you ever wondered what would happen if you combined the hack-and-slash action of Devil May Cry, the worst of Bubsy the Bobcat's platforming ineptitude, and the perspective of a man who took way too much acid during a church service? I might not have the exact answer to that overly specific and entirely rhetorical question, but I might have the second best thing. El Shaddai, Ascension of the Metatron. And no, that title isn't just a string of consciousness that James Joyce would consider too on the nose for Finnegan's Wake, but rather a bit of a teaser for the plot of the adventure I'd like to take you on today. But before I get too carried away, allow me to break down that title a bit for those of us who might not be all that familiar with the terminology used, as well as a little bit of context for those who clicked on this video having no idea what they were about to get into. For starters, El Shaddai is one of the Hebrew names for God, more or less translating to God Almighty, and Metatron is an angel from certain elements of Judo-Islamic and Christian mythology, said to be a sort of celestial scribe. Thus, the Michael Bay version of the title would probably be something like God, Rise of the Angel of Record Keeping, though neither really rolls off the tongue, so I'm just going to refer to this game as this game from now on. Development of this game was led by Sawaki Takeyasu, who made a name for himself in the industry as a character artist and designer for Devil May Cry and Okami. The story is very loosely based on the Book of Enoch, an ancient religious text that is typically only considered biblical canon by the Ethiopian and Eritrean Orthodox Tewahedo churches. So while the source material is a tad obscure, it does tie back into what is biblically in vogue, as the protagonist is a man named Enoch, father of Methuselah and the great-grandfather of Noah, the man most people know for building a big old boat. Summarizing this game is nearly impossible. But if I was to take a crack at it, I would say that if the Book of Enoch was a manga, then this game is its anime adaptation, meaning it takes quite a few liberties with the source material, but certainly spices things up. But unlike most anime, there is no filler here. Instead, things happen very rapidly. Allow me to prove my own point by summarizing the basic premise and characters. 7 angels have stolen the wisdom of heaven and descended to Earth in order to spread the wisdom to humans, which we soon find out is causing them to evolve at an advanced pace well beyond what they should. This evolution without struggle is causing humanity to become complacent and worship the fallen angels, aka the Watchers, aka the Grigori, as gods, thus causing their souls not to ascend to heaven when they die. Their actions are also endangering the entirety of Earth, so the Council of Heaven has decided that the Earth must be cleansed with a great flood. In order to prevent this flood, God tasks Enoch with finding and sealing away the souls of the fallen angels for all eternity. To help him on his journey, God tasks the 4 archangels, Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, who is a woman now, and Uriel, to accompany him. As they cannot descend to Earth directly, they take the form of swans and mostly spout awkward exposition and directions at Enoch. Uriel is the only one who actually provides tangible aid by acting as your gauge power, but we'll get back to that later. Also along for the ride is Lucifel, the super powerful, super mysterious, and super sexy twin brother of Michael. He is also Lucifer before his fall from heaven. These 2 facts are not actually confirmed in-game, but are basically confirmed in extended materials, including the manga series of this game that we will not get to later. Lucifel basically functions as save points throughout the game and occasionally steps in during cutscenes to save Enoch or break the 4th wall. Also, this is Earth. Yeah, I don't see it. If you are starting to feel a little overwhelmed at this point, that's pretty understandable, as this game throws everything at you in rapid succession and gives you almost no time to breathe. I'm not exaggerating when I say this is the only game I have ever played in my life that made me feel exhausted when I first played through it. As Lucifel himself puts it, this adventure can be completed in 7 hours if you're good enough. but it took me over a month to actually finish it for the first time because I just couldn't stomach playing for too long. And it took me well over several months to put together my thoughts in a coherent enough manner to share them. Now at this point I can't really ignore the elephant in the room much longer. So I would like to address what might be my favorite and least favorite aspect of this game, which you've undoubtedly noticed by now: the art direction. Nearly every element of this game is designed to be as pretty to look at as possible, with tons of different art styles that change from location to location, cell shading being used for characters in certain areas, and wildly vibrant colors almost always present on the screen. It's a smorgasbord for the eyes, with every level looking like it has been lifted from a completely different art team. It's so impressive and shifts so often that it often makes this game significantly more difficult to play and at times genuinely nauseating. I mean, look at this! There were times when I was playing when I felt motion sickness, which alone is an achievement that makes me want to recommend it to other people just to see how they react to playing it. But I'll feign professionalism and try to actually review it first. I just wanted to get the art out of the way early, because I believe it was the game's main selling point, all things considered. And to me, it is a very, very mixed blessing. This game is undeniably gorgeous, but that beauty does belie a bit of a beast. Now, for the sake of organizing my thoughts going forward, I'm gonna separate my rundown of this game into 3 main parts: story, combat, and everything else. I don't have much else to say about the visuals, as I believe the positives and negatives kinda make it a wash. So for further information, either check out the gameplay in the background or rewind this video and listen to me on repeat until you're satisfied. With that out of the way, let's get into it. Story is up first, and we're diving into spoilers all the way, so buckle up, it's a wild ride. As I mentioned earlier, Enoch's goal is to track down the fallen angels on Earth in order to defeat them and imprison their souls for betraying God and giving the Council reason to flood the Earth. The game kicks off properly with you taking control of Enoch as you prepare the prisons you are to bind the Grigori to, learning their names as you open the seals. There are 7 in total: Barakel, Sariel, Amaros, Ezekiel, Arakiel, their leader Semyaza, and his right-hand man Azazel. On the way down, you get attacked by some baddies as you have to fight them off as a bit of a taste of the combat to come. Our boy Enoch then reaches Earth and is intercepted by Azazel, who beats the unholy shit out of any first-time player and tells Enoch not to search for them. Enoch then, of course, searches for them, wandering around for 300 years and garnering a nice collection of 72 names for himself as he goes. He encounters the Freemen, a group of humans who resist the fallen angels and fight against their followers, and eventually stumbles on a tear in the very fabric of space where the Watchers have hidden their giant, totally not evil tower. You encounter a Nephilim, the progeny of a human and an angel, who shows you how to enter the tower, each floor of which is an entire realm ruled by one of the fallen angels. The first one you enter is the realm of Ezekiel, who is also a woman now. And before anyone gets upset, I'm not pointing out these sex changes as a negative thing or anything. I just find it interesting that 2 major angels were swapped to being female for very minimal to no story reasons. Not a bad thing per se, since adaptations are allowed to be different. It's just kind of interesting. Anyway, in Ezekiel's realm, you meet the Nephilim's friend, Nana, a young girl who tells you the story of Ishtar, an important hero to the Freemen who is prophesied to return and fight against the Watchers. You fight your way through the realm and defeat Fula and Wula, Ezekiel's pet pigs, who are freaking huge. Next, you go to Sariel's realm, where he is harboring his massive amount of Nephilim children. The archangels elaborate that the Nephilim live in constant agony and eat each other in some effort to escape their pain. And when they eat enough of their own kind, they transform into a monstrous fire Nephilim, enough of whom would be enough to destroy the entire world. You fight through the ordeal, beat Sariel, who keeps going on about his love for humans, even though the angels can't actually experience human emotions. His death causes all of his Nephilim to die off, and you continue on to Barakel's realm. When you arrive, you are tasked with defeating a fire Nephilim that is rampaging and destroying everything. You fight through, get in a banal boss battle with the big baleful baddie and best Barakel's brat, but bollocks. It turns out Barakel's Nephilim also consumed him, so it turns into Barakel's Nephilim, which is an even bigger, badder version of a fire Nephilim. You get pwned in a cutscene, and the spirit of Methuselah, Enoch's child, who probably isn't even liquid at this point, saves you and kills off Barakel's Nephilim. So we won with hacks, but I guess that's bound to happen when we have literal god mode on our side. GG, moving on. The next realm is Azacelles, and it is a giant Tron-esque motorcycle segment followed by a boss fight with a robot. Confused? Should have paid more attention in Sabbath school, I guess. We're only about halfway through though, so try to keep up. Next we come to Amaros' realm, which is where things get a little strange. Amaros was actually pretty close to Enoch, and liked talking to him about his experiences on Earth, making him pretty friendly with our protagonist. Unlike the other fallen angels, he's pretty close to understanding and expressing human emotions, even though he technically can't experience any at all. Also, his Nephilim is a giant squid and is the only one that seems to be content with its existence and doesn't live in constant agony. Also, Amaros lost his voice when he fell from heaven. Also, to the third power, Amaros has one hell of a diva entrance and spends the first half of his boss fight just cutting the rug, while you beat up on some of his mobs. You fight him, but then motherfucking Belial, Lord of Lies, interrupts by kidnapping Nana and dragging her into the darkness, aka Hell. Enoch, being a selfless idiot, jumps headfirst after her despite Lucifel telling him not to. Amaros cries over it, and Lucifel guilt trips him into helping Enoch. The archangels bless Amaros and he goes into the darkness, so you get to play as him as you go through one of the most godforsakenly nauseating and frustrating platforming levels I have ever encountered in my life. You find Nana, whose body has been basically taken over by Ishtar's soul, and Lucifel takes her out of the darkness. You then find Enoch, who has been completely corrupted, so you gotta knock some sense into yourself so you can go back to playing with the movesets you've been using for the rest of the game. Amaros beats Enoch, but then motherfucking Belial, Lord of Lies, spews out a whole mess of darkness to try to corrupt them both. Lucifel swoops in and saves Enoch, but just watches Amaros get corrupted like a cold-hearted G, cause angels are kinda dicks. Enoch then gets encased in carbonite and his soul goes back up to heaven for 10 years, while he has an internal struggle to free himself of corruption. Meanwhile, the Grigori regain their power and kill pretty much all of the freemen, including their ironically named leader Sin, who also happens to be Nana's adoptive father. Nana finds his skull, freaks out, and transforms into Ishtar completely, taking over the remnants of the freemen so la révolution can vivre. Enoch finally gets over himself and gets back to Earth, where he continues fighting through the tower. You battle your way through Arakiel's realm while Ishtar dukes it out with Ezekiel. Along the way, you stumble across Arakiel's grave, as he apparently died during the fall. So instead of getting to fight another Wicked Watcher, you get to take out God's righteous fury on another one of Ezekiel's pigs. This one is named Bula, because Ezekiel names her pets the same way I name random merchants in my D&D campaigns. You then find Ishtar, who's been tainted during her fight and beat Ezekiel yourself, and then it's time to go fight through Semyaza's realm. Here you finally get to fight Azazel for real, and he goes on and on about how painful the fall was, and how some of the Grigori didn't survive, and he transforms into some disgusting bug monster so he gets 0 pity points. He then tries to beat the established boss rule thus far, by transforming a second time, which apparently upsets motherfucking Belial, Lord of Lies, who sends a heavily corrupted Amaros to murk him. Then you gotta fight Amaros in 3 stages, because of course you do. Dark Amaros dies, or maybe dies, and Enoch purifies Ishtar, which he apparently could have done at any time, but decided instead to leave her wallowing in pain, so way to go, hero! The two go to Semyaza's life support system, find it empty because he's been dead the whole time! And Lucifel pieces out with Ishtar so Enoch can shut down the whole tower for good. Flood averted, Team God wins, happy ending, roll credits. The end stinger shows that Amaros' Nephilim is the only one still around and is pretty content just floating around in the ocean. Neat. Now that we're done with the plot, let's just take a quick break and catch our breath. Okay, break's over, on to the meat of the gameplay. The combat is a fairly standard combo action beat-em-up similar to Devil May Cry. Shocking, almost as if the dev lead was heavily involved with the DMC series. With some light rock, paper, scissors elements. There are 3 weapon types: Arch, Gale, and Veil. Arch is strong against Veil, Veil is strong against Gale, Gale is strong against Arch. Simple enough. I say it's a very light element because ultimately it doesn't matter too much what weapon you use against the average enemy. You'll still be able to beat the vast majority of the game using whatever holy tool of death tickles your fancy, even on harder difficulties. It mostly comes down to preference what weapon you'll actually want to use most. Arch is well balanced and offers decent maneuverability. Gale is a fast ranged attack style that's very quick but has garbage defense. And Veil is a big fuck off shield that makes you almost impossible to damage if you use it right. Certain bosses can only be damaged by certain weapons, and all are weak, strong, or neutral against Arch, Veil, or Gale, but that's about as far as the actual strategy goes for the most part. Especially since you get the Eyes of Truth in most boss fights, which helps you figure out what you should bash the bosses with. Though, again, I believe it really ultimately comes down to preference. As long as you can hit the boss and they are not immune to your weapon of choice, you can whittle them down eventually. It may take a while, but it can be done. Your health is represented by your armor. The more damage you take, the less armor you have, until you are reduced down to just your jeans, because Enoch can wear modern jeans, but hasn't yet grasped the concept of a t-shirt. This armor break applies to many of the standard enemies and even the Watchers in their first forms. The visual clues for bosses are even more obvious, with the game taking the time to show you that some element has changed, usually via a literal color change. Your weapons are also susceptible to breaking. As you fight, they go from holy white and blue to corrupted black and red, because evil knows how to color coordinate in a much more visually striking way. Come at me, God! If they stay corrupted, they not only do less damage, but also have a chance of breaking, leaving you with nothing but your fists to defend yourself. You can either purify your weapon, leaving you vulnerable for a few seconds, or you can beat up an enemy and steal their weapon. Beat up enough enemies and your power gauge fills up. Once full, you can activate it to have ODL engage Enoch's Sicko mode, making you hit harder, and all the things any generic power state tends to do. If you end it before it runs its course, you unleash some pretty devastating power attacks that usually smash just about anything or anyone in your path. So that's pretty cool. And frankly, that's really about all there is to the combat. It's an interesting system, but it's really not fleshed out all that much. Combos are exceptionally limited, so most combat encounters tend to boil down to mash attack, steal weapon, block, dodge, mash attack. You can break enemy blocks with the right timing on your attacks, and if you block just as you're getting attacked, you can stun the enemy for a second. It's kind of fun at first, but it very quickly wears out its welcome, especially since so many of the enemies are just damage sponges. Doubly so for the bosses, who also have lots of straight up BS attacks that can dunk you pretty quick. Which is why I'm quite grateful for one neat feature that I haven't seen replicated in too many other games. If you get your ass handed to you, you can mash some buttons to get a second wind, reviving with full health. You can only do it so many times before you game over, but it's still really nice to not have to retry an entire boss fight just because they got a lucky shot in when they had a sliver of health left. but it's still not enough for me to exactly be excited when the next wave of enemies spawns in. This ability to recover might be the reason behind why you are constantly accosted by the fallen angels as you go through the levels. Every now and again, one of the Watchers will appear and challenge you to a quick fight, where if you don't already know their attack patterns, you will likely get stomped teeth first into the nearest curb. If you are good enough, you can fend them off before they wreck too much of your health away. But I have never played a game that set you up against this many pointless, unwinnable fights before. It's excessive and it really drags the pacing, especially on subsequent playthroughs. There really isn't much else to be said about the combat, so now it's time for everything else gameplay-wise, which pretty much boils down to exploration and platforming. Exploration is extremely limited, as much of the game is very, very linear, with only a few out-of-the-way secrets to be discovered, most of which are just text files to fill in some of the story. There are also entrances into the darkness that you can explore to complete platforming challenges and find the Bones of Ishtar. Collecting all the bones unlocks the best armor in the game, which makes you invincible, so definitely a cool reward, but I don't know if it's really worth the hassle. The hassle I am referring to is of course my absolute least favorite aspect of this game. The god-damned platforming. I'll go ahead and preface this by saying I'm not really a big fan of platforming in general. I don't really play many platforming games, and when it appears in other genres it usually brings down the overall experience for me. But this is not just bad platforming, it's downright sadistic. Third-person platforming sections are often difficult enough due to how hard it can sometimes be to see exactly where your character will land. Typically, shadows and the like are used to indicate landing position, and you can usually move the camera around in order to better line up your character. Here there is no camera moving. The camera is never in your control, remaining in fixed locations throughout the entire game, often changing at what feels like completely random intervals specifically to make navigation more difficult. It doesn't go back when you need to backtrack. It makes seeing side paths a matter of obsessive examination. It makes some jumps complete leaps of faith. No matter what you are doing, it always feels like the camera is fighting against you. Sometimes, like during the first stage of the Amaros battle, it is used creatively, but more often it just feels like the developers wanted to show off their environments in a very specific way. Player enjoyment be damned. I mean, even the art style seems designed to fight the player. There are plenty of segments where seeing your shadow is impossible, so good luck figuring out where you're gonna land. Sometimes you won't even know something is a gap or a hazard until it's too late. The constantly shifting art styles can make something safe in one section and something very, very similar looking will be a bottomless pit in the next. And when you combine the crazy art styles, the shifting fixed camera perspective, and the complete inability to figure out where you're actually going to land, you get the Amaros section. Good God, I hate this level. I felt genuinely nauseous when I played through this level. Not just the first time either, and I want it on the record that I have played hundreds of games over the course of my life, and this is quite literally the only one that has ever made me feel physically unwell. And that's not all. This game has the sheer audacity to throw in 2D side-scrolling platforming sections as well, sometimes for the majority of entire levels. I could understand doing it once as a sort of unexpected perspective change and challenge, but it does it no less than 4 different times, and I assure you, it overstays its welcome well before the end of the second segment. But by far, one of the more challenging aspects of the platforming is trying to acquire all those bones I mentioned earlier. This requires entering the darkness and platforming in mostly monochrome segments while you try to find the right path that will get you to the bones. While you are climbing upwards in search of these collectibles, you must be careful not to fall into the rising darkness or allow it to catch up to you. If you touch it at all, you are awarded with an immediate game over. Like, roll credits, bad end, back to title screen, game over. This obviously can set you back quite a bit of progress, which is a bit harsh considering that these are completely optional collectibles that contribute nothing to the story at large. It makes the already difficult to navigate segments absolutely nerve-wracking and stressful when you are trying to find some of the more well-hidden bones. And in the case of the last section, good God, you better bring as much patience as you can muster. Because unless you get really lucky on your first attempt, you are probably going to have to do this over and over and over again until you find just the right path to reach the bones and escape the darkness. It's pretty miserable. And with all that said, that's about all there is to this game. And if you're still here at this point, thank you for being such a trooper. If you comprehend everything at this point, congratulations are in order. I've simplified it as much as I could for the sake of time and to not go into every convoluted bit of the story, but it's still a lot to take in. I understand that this isn't really the best way to review a game per se, but I'm still pretty new to this, and this was a very complicated game to get my thoughts together on. Ultimately, I have to wonder if it was worth it, because I don't think this is the kind of game that benefits from being played. Allow me to elaborate. I believe the strongest aspect of this game is the narrative and the themes it explores, none of which are actually all that clearly established during the game itself. You have to hunt for some of the story in regards to Ishtar and the Freemen, as well as some of the details of the Watchers themselves. A lot of what happens during the game is pretty confusing the first time through, even during cutscenes. Now, it's certainly no Metal Gear Solid, but a single casual playthrough isn't really going to be enough to get everything out of the story unless you are really invested in everything being presented to you. Herein lies some of the problem. I just don't think this is a very fun game. The combat is serviceable and has some neat mechanics to it, but it's not fleshed out enough to remain interesting for even the duration of this fairly short adventure. The platforming makes me feel like I'm trying to drunkenly stumble my way through an M.C. Escher painting, and the exploration elements are frankly underwhelming. So all the game elements of this game are just not very enjoyable. Therefore, there's just nothing here to grip you enough to actually get you invested into the story. And in fact, the only thing that even compelled me to follow through with finishing this game was the subject matter of the narrative. I myself am not a religious person, but I do enjoy a lot of the theoretical and cultural aspects of various religions. So a game based on a relatively obscure religious text that delves into the concept of humans needing to evolve through adversity at a controlled pace is actually quite fascinating to me. And it's the sort of thing I'd likely enjoy discussing with a close group of friends into the early hours of the morning. I just wish there was a better game surrounding it to really elevate these concepts. When all's said and done, El Shaddai, Ascension of the Metatron is one of the most frustrating games I've ever played. Not just because some of the gameplay is infuriating, but because I really want it to be a better game. Not many games are this insanely ambitious, and I appreciate so much about the risks that were taken with the subject matter, gameplay variation, and art. It's a game that was fully willing to be itself, and I love it for that. But just because a game takes great risks doesn't mean it's a great game. a risk is a risk because sometimes it just doesn't pay off. And in this case, I just don't think everything lined up quite right. So, do I think this is a bad game? No, actually. I don't think it's terribly fun, but I don't think it's funnily terrible either. It's a middling game with pros and cons holding an interesting narrative concept captive. But there's a manga series to fix that problem, so play the game or not, your call. At least we can all appreciate Big Daddy Lucifer in all his snappy glory.